Hi everybody, we are going to be looking at a critical reasoning video today. We're going to be working on a sample evaluate the argument question type. So we're going to start by reading this argument that you see. We will talk about our understanding of the argument and what the topic of discussion is. We'll talk about the evaluate the question type. We will discuss our approach and how we have to think about this particular question type, and then we'll look at our answer options and go through the process of elimination. So let's get started. This is the argument that has been presented to you. In an effort to curb drug abuse, the government has imposed strict laws to prosecute the dealers. So we've been presented an action that the government has taken. We don't know the details of it, but all that we know is that there are some laws that are in place. This is not an opinion of any kind, this is more of a fact that has been presented. So this is some sort of a premise that has been given to us. However, so the however indicates that there is a change in track that's going to happen in the argument. Such an initiative is unlikely to be effective. So now this clearly is an opinion, right? When you say that something is unlikely to be effective, you're basically saying I don't think this is going to work, and that becomes your personal opinion on the topic. So now we have the author of this paragraph who has come forth with an opinion. Now typically when this happens, you have another person's opinion, or you have a fact or a couple of facts presented, and then the author saying, you know what, I disagree with it. Having said that he doesn't agree with it, this author is now going to go ahead and justify why he believes that this initiative is not going to be effective. So if you are familiar with critical reasoning, you can kind of expect this pattern. You can expect the next couple of sentences to be some sort of explanation of this author's opinion. Why does he think these laws are not going to work? So let's read on and find that out. Prosecuting dealers will lead to a shortage of drugs. That sounds like a good thing so far. So he's setting up the explanation. So if you catch the dealers, put them in jail, there's going to be a shortage of drug supply. But at the same time, because no efforts are being taken to curb demand, drugs will be sold at a premium, attracting more people to the very remunerative job of drug dealing. This one sentence has a lot packed into it. So he's coming up with this theory of different things that will possibly happen once these laws are in place, right? For the first thing, you're going to catch the dealers. He has no doubts about the effectiveness of the government's ability to catch the dealers. But because you're catching the dealers, there's going to be a shortage in the supply. And because there's going to be a shortage in the supply, there's still a demand there. Nothing has been done to curb demand. Short supply, high demand, prices are going to go up. So now other people are going to think, if I could sell drugs, I can make a lot of money. So they are going to find drug dealing a remunerative job. So you're going to have a lot more people who are going to be willing to be dealers, is the whole point. So you'll catch some dealers, but more dealers will pop up, is the author's point. Therefore, now here's another point here. To effectively reduce drug abuse, the government will have to prosecute the drug users and not the dealers. So now this is another opinion put forth by the author, and this opinion is in the form of some sort of a suggestion. So the whole argument is something is happening, government has taken an action. Author's first point is this action is not good enough, gives you an explanation as to why more and more dealers will keep popping up even if you catch them, and therefore gives an alternative solution. What can we do? Right, having read the argument, let's look at our question. Now the question says, which of the following is the most relevant information in evaluating the credibility of the argument? Let's talk about this question type before we talk about our answer options. If I made a claim, if I had an opinion, and if I said something like, if you solve just 300 CR questions, you will become an expert in CR and you will have 100% accuracy in any CR question you do after that, right? You're not going to take it at face value. What is the first thing you're going to do? You're going to ask me questions. Really? Is that true, Shweta? What is the proof? Where have you seen that? Give me one example of a person who solves 300 questions and has had 100% accuracy. How do you know that's universally applicable for everybody? How do you know I am not a smart person who can become extremely good at CR after just 50 questions or 10 questions? So you're going to have a bunch of questions for me. And now I'm going to have to give you answers. Depending on my answers, you can choose to either be convinced by what I'm saying, or you can choose to say, this is not a valid point at all, I disagree with it. So how convinced you become with this argument is going to depend on how good my answers are, right? That's what happens in a normal conversation. Think of this question type as having that kind of a conversation with the author of the argument, right? Now he's made a point, he's expressed an opinion. Your job is to now ask questions. If you notice, each of your answer options kind of look like a question themselves. You are asking a question. Whether efforts have been successfully taken in other countries. Do you know whether this has worked in other countries? Do you know whether the payoff from selling drug outweighs the severity of the punishment? So you're asking these questions. Now the author has to respond, and depending on the answer, you're going to be convinced or not convinced. In CR parlance, being convinced or not convinced, being convinced is to strengthen the argument, and being not convinced is basically to weaken the argument. So what you have to do is think of evaluate questions as a combination of strengthen and weaken questions. You have raised a generic statement. One of these statements will present a viewpoint, will present a topic that is so relevant to the topic of discussion in the author's argument that depending on what possible response you can get from the author, the argument will become either super strong or super weak. That's what you're doing with an evaluate question. So in order to process our answer options, we're going to come up with one good way to do the process of elimination is to come up with possible extreme answers for each of these statements. If one stand weakens the argument and the other side strengthens the argument, you're looking at the right answer. And that will happen for exactly one of these 5 answer options. What are the possible incorrect options? One side will weaken or strengthen, the other will do nothing. Both sides will have no impact on the argument. Both sides will weaken or both sides will strengthen. None of which you want. You want one side of the answer to weaken and the other side of the answer to strengthen. Let me explain and illustrate that with these answer options. Let's just look at the first one. Whether efforts have been successfully taken in any other country to regulate drug users. You're asking this guy, has some effort been taken in other countries? What are the possible answers? Your possible answers are yes, efforts have been taken in other countries, or no, efforts have not been successfully taken in other countries. These are the only 2 possible answers to this question, to this statement. So we're going to answer yes, no for all of our 5 statements and then see which one has one option that weakens and one option that strengthens. So before we get into the process of elimination, let's just quickly summarize the argument and think about what we want the correct answer option to say. What's happening in the argument? You have the drug dealers and you have the drug users, right? The government is currently targeting the drug dealers and saying that they need to be prosecuted, whereas the author believes that what you need to actually do is target the drug users. Only then will this drug law be effective. This is the crux of the author's argument, that this will not work and this will work. You want the correct answer option to evaluate one or both of these. So will the government's current action work or not work? You want the answer option that provides decisive proof that weakens this whole action or strengthens this whole action taken by the government. Or you want to focus on the other side of the effectiveness of targeting drug users, and you want an option that either weakens or strengthens this viewpoint that the author has expressed, this suggestion that the author has given. Because remember that this won't work and that this will work are both opinions expressed by the author. You need an answer option that minimum targets one of the 2 opinions. If you have an option that targets both, that would be perfect. On the absence of such an option, if you have an option that targets at least one of the 2 opinions expressed by the author, that would be good. So let's go through this process of elimination, looking at each of our answer options. There are two possible answers here, yes and a no. Let's think about how it impacts the argument that has been made by the author. The statement says whether efforts have been successfully taken in any other country to regulate drug users. So this whole argument made by the author is about one government and one country. In this answer option, we are asking, has this worked in other countries? Let's say yes, it has worked in other countries. And if I say no, it has not worked in other countries, that action has not been successfully taken. At the end of the day, we are talking about other countries. If you're talking about other countries, what is the guarantee that what's happening in one country, you can say will happen the same way for another country? For example, we are going through a global pandemic. There are so many countries that have taken some sort of an action. Some countries have been more successful at managing the situation, and some countries have not been. So if you took one particular country as a case study, could we conclude that that will hold true for every single country in the world? Obviously we cannot. So when the discussion is about one country, this answer option that talks about other countries is irrelevant, irrespective of whether I answer a yes or a no. So this one does not weaken or strengthen the argument. This one does not weaken or strengthen the argument. Either way, this whole answer option you can eliminate. It is not going to be a valid answer option because it shifts the scope of the discussion from one country to some other country. Let's look at the next one. Whether the payoff from selling drugs outweighs the severity of the punishment. So let's say yes. What would the yes be? That it outweighs, that the payoff is greater than the punishment, right? And if I say no, that the punishment is actually greater than the payoff. These are the two things that I can say. Now, if the punishment is greater than the payoff, then the willingness of new people to become drug dealers, will they be willing to take a risk, right? It's a whole thing that comes into the discussion. And if the payoff is greater than the punishment, then there might be more people who are willing to say, there is a chance I might go to jail, but I'll make a lot of money before I do that. So maybe I will be a drug dealer after all. You could have people saying that. So this seems to be somehow relevant to this whole discussion of whether you will have a successful strategy targeting drug dealers or whether you will have a successful strategy targeting drug users. Except, remember, all of this information is new information that you are bringing in. You're raising a new question to the author and asking, what more can you tell me to justify your viewpoint, right? What has happened in the argument is this whole discussion has already been somehow implied by the author. And I have quoted the line from the argument here. The author already says that there is a good chance of attracting more people to the very remunerative job of drug dealing. It has already been established that the payoff is likely to be much better than the punishment, right? So what you should focus on is targeting the opinions and the conclusions drawn by the author. But always remember, when you're weakening or strengthening, you don't question or focus on the facts. When it has already been established that the payoff is significant, you don't go and ask, is the payoff significant? Such an answer option will be incorrect. You must remember the rule. When you're weakening, strengthening, evaluating, never target the premises. What is established, you don't go back and touch on those facts again. And that's the reason we're going to go ahead and eliminate this answer option as well. Let's look at the next one. Whether drugs will continue to be sold at a premium when there are dealers in the market again. We're talking about a scenario. Let's answer the yes and the no, right? This answer option is a little evident and easy to eliminate, but we'll still go through the process of saying yes, it will be sold at a premium, and no, it will come back to a normal price after there are more dealers. If there are dealers in the market, again, the government strategy has failed. if after that the price goes up or the price doesn't go up is inconsequential to the discussion. The whole discussion is, will dealing continue? That's what we are trying to establish in order to determine whether the government's actions would be successful, right? When this is what we are trying to establish and the answer option says it's a given, there are dealers in the market again, that's a given, right? You're not evaluating the argument, or at least the evaluation is not going to be based on the price of the drugs once it is sold by these new dealers, right? So you need to ask, will there be new dealers or something along those lines of evaluating the conclusion, rather than talking about once the conclusion has been validated, what will be the price of the drugs. So this is post validation of the conclusion, post establishing the credibility of the conclusion, not part of the process of establishing the conclusion. And so I'm going to eliminate C as well. So get D. Whether the majority of the users will be willing to pay a premium to continue to use the drugs. So this talks about users, which is kind of relevant to the author's conclusion, but let's answer a yes and a no, right? Yes, they will be willing to pay, right? No, they will not pay. Now, what was the author's argument? That the dealers will be able to sell at a premium or charge more for the drugs because there is a shortage in the supply, was the point that the author made. But if someone is a drug user and they're like, oh, the price has doubled, I can't afford it anymore, I might as well go to a rehab center and find a way to stop using this habit because I have no money left to spend on it. If someone says that, if they're not willing to pay, right, then what happens? These people might be trying to sell at a premium, but there will be no buyers for it. This situation means that there will be no buyers. If this is the situation, then that means yes, there will be buyers, people will be selling at a premium, and there will be people who will continue to buy at a premium. So how does this impact the argument? If there is a willingness to pay and there are going to be buyers, then the author is absolutely right. You're strengthening the argument here because no matter what you do with the dealers, there are always going to be buyers who are willing to go to any length to keep maintaining their drug habit. Which means unless you target the drug users, you are not going to have an effective solution to drug abuse. So the author is right here. As long as the buyers are willing to pay a premium, the situation that he has presented as a hypothetical will actually pan out, will actually happen. But here we are weakening the argument. If buyers are no longer willing to buy the drugs, sure, dealers might be in shortage, drugs might be in shortage, prices might go up, but no one's going to buy those drugs. If no one's going to buy the drugs, then you have effectively put an end to this whole drug dealing game, which means the government's current strategy has worked and the author's hypothetical has not come about, which means the author is wrong in saying the government strategy is bad and you're weakening the argument. So you notice in this particular option, when you do a yes, no, you're not scope shifting, you're not changing in the topic. You've come back with a direct question to the author and you're basically telling the author, I see what you're saying. I see how there could be a premium because there is a shortage of drugs. But what about people who are using drugs? Will they be able to pay that money? If they're not paying, then your whole argument falls apart. That's your response to the author when you bring this option in, right? And the key word here, which we have not highlighted in the answer option, it is actually important, is it says majority of the users. If this was only one or two users, it will have no impact, but you're saying the majority, most of the users will not be willing to pay money and will be willing to pay money. So you're correspondingly, because it's the majority, strengthening and weakening the argument. Holding on to D, I'm quickly looking at the last option. Whether the government will be able to keep track of new dealers as and when they enter into the market. Let's answer a yes, no. Here they will be able to track. Here they will not be able to track. It's not about keeping track of dealers, is it? It's about prosecuting them. That's what the whole argument was about. So if I say yes, I'm keeping track, does that necessarily mean I'm catching and prosecuting them? Like I might know that this guy is a drug dealer, but I might never catch him in action. I might never be able to actually take legal action against him. And no, if they don't track, they're not going to be able to take legal action again. So just because you're answering a yes doesn't mean this law will be effective, because keeping track is wholly different from prosecuting. If this had said something along the lines of, will the government be able to prosecute the drug dealers as and when they come into the market? Will the government be able to catch these drug dealers as and when they come into the market? Then it would have been a more relevant option, because a yes and a no would have correspondingly strengthened and weakened the argument. So evaluate the question type is not a very straightforward question type. You need to practice your thought process and your strategy for weaken and strengthen questions, as this question type is an amalgamation of the two, right? We did arrive that choice D was the correct answer, but we had this process of elimination that was a little more detailed than it would be for a weaken or a strengthen question, because we had to consider both sides of the coin and see whether it both impacted positively and negatively on the argument. So when you're practicing CR, practice weaken and strengthen questions, build up your confidence in weaken and strengthen questions, and then once you're confident, you can practice the higher difficulty variation of it, which would be your evaluate questions.